Hi, everybody. Welcome to JRoots' Global Day of Testimony, where we're going to be having various different things throughout today and tomorrow for all the different time zones. This one has been put up as well earlier than Yom HaShoah starts, which of course will start this evening at 8 o'clock in Israel. For Australia, who this evening, or should I say right now, is starting Yom HaShoah at 8 o'clock. And we are so privileged to have Rena Quint with us, who has been a great friend of JRoots since incision. We've got viewers on Facebook and YouTube who are watching as well. And we want to thank you very much, Rena. And I know you've got a very, very busy schedule already started this week, dealing with Holocaust talks that you've been doing up till now. And I want to thank you so much for coming and being prepared to give over your testimony here as well. So I want to ask you, first of all, Rena, if you don't mind, what gives you the strength to do this?
I think it's very important to do it. We keep on saying that there aren't that many survivors who are alive, who are willing and who are able and speak in English to reach audiences. As long as I'm able to do it, I think it's very important. And the letters and the calls that I get from people tell me how important it is. So I'm all for it, very much for it. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity.
We thank you, first of all. You know, we've been on a number of journeys throughout Poland, and you've enhanced our journeys totally by being able to speak to us as well over camera, even if you couldn't be there in person from your hometown. So I want to take you all the way back now on this Yom HaShoah. Of course, 1939 for a lot of people seems a long way away. But for us and for the Jewish people themselves who feel the pain of the loss of the Shoah and the loss of your family that we're going to be dealing with, I'm sure for you it never goes away. When we tell people about Yom HaShoah, you know, a day to remember. Every day for you is a day of remembrance. This isn't particularly for you this day. It's for, I think, Am Yisrael, for the people of Israel. But in order for us to be able to really get to understand this, I want to take you all the way back to your childhood now, if you don't mind, so that you can tell us about the beauty of what once was the small town of Piotrków, which wasn't so small, by the way, from the Jewish community's perspective, and is also very famous. I'm sure you're going to tell us why. Let's go all the way back so that you can tell us.
39 sounds a long time ago, and 36, the year that I was born, or maybe 35, the year that I was born. If it sounds confused that I don't know when I was born, that's true. It is confusing because until 1989, I didn't know. I found out a lot about myself. But in 1935 or 36, I was born. And in 1939, when I was about 3.5 years old, the war broke out. Before the war, Piotrków was a very beautiful city where people sort of said Poland was here we live, where Jews felt that this was a place that they could stay. And in Piotrków, Rabbi Lau was the famous rabbi of the great synagogue. And before him was Rabbi Meir Shapiro, who left Piotrków to build a synagogue called Chachmei Lublin, so Rabbi Lau took over. It was also a place where many religious books, like prayer books and Talmud and the Gemaras and all kinds of things, the big publishing houses were in Piotrków. In 1939, September 1st, when the war broke out, the planes were coming overhead. Marches of soldiers came in. The Polish army was not ready. Some of them didn't even have proper shoes. People started running all around because bombs were flying and the tanks kept on coming in. Some people were lucky enough to be able to get onto carriages to run into Russia. Some people ran into different cities or different countries. It didn't help because Hitler followed them many, many different places.
So, Rena, your memory, you remember the Germans walking into the town?
I remember a lot of things, but now I have a tremendous amount of documents that I found.
Right.
In 1989, I went back to Poland and I found my birth certificate and I found the factory that my father and I worked in, and I found the synagogue, which is now a library. So many of the things I remember and many of things I have found related
since then.
period.
But what's your first memory of the beauty of life in Piotr? Do you remember
I
Shabbat at your
Yeah,
family?
I think I remember that I had two brothers, David and Yossi, David and Yossi. And my mother used to make a big pot filled with meat, potatoes, beans, and barley. And that was called chont. It's the kind of food like a Mexican stew, I guess, but Jewish people have this chont. And my brothers used to pull me on a sled. Now, why I remember a sled rather than a carriage, because it snowed so much, and I just remember the snow. And they pulled me to a bakery, and there we would bake all night. And the next day, we'd go and pick it up, and the aroma, the smell, you knew it was Shabbat, and it would be brought back. I've been back to that bakery when I went back to Poland. I've been back many times, and it's amazing because there are no Jews left in Pietrkov, but in that bakery, they bake white braided bread, which Jewish people called challah. And even though there are no Jews there, it's just a custom for these Polish people to have that kind of bread on Friday.
Amazing. And you remember any other festivals that took place in Piotr as a kid before the Germans came and destroyed your childhood?
I don't think I remember, but Barbara Sofer, who helped me write the book, asked me lots and lots of questions. And she asked me about Manishtana, and I think I must have said it, but I don't remember. But what I when I came to the United States and after the war, when I went to Sweden, I knew how to ice skate very well. And I liked ice skating. And I read that children of 3 in Pietrkov used to go skating all the time. There were little pools and ponds, or a stream went through the city. I must have learned how to ice skate there, because how did I know how to get on the ice skate so quickly after the war?
Right. So on September the 1st, 1939, I mean, not just your world changed, the whole world changed.
Right.
As Germany invaded Poland, and then the Allies, various different Allied countries, of course, proclaimed war against the Germans on that day. Tell us about you said the tanks came rolling in, the bombs started dropping in Piotrków. You are 3 or 4 years old, and we're
Right.
still
And
not sure.
my
What are your
mother,
memories?
well, I should have told you that I remember that there was a kiosk across the street from Platz Chernivtskyigo where we lived. And I know the address now because I found the house, and I even have the deed that my mother bought the house, although I have no right getting it, but I found the deed. And across there was a kiosk. We got ice cream, and we must have been outside, and my mother rushed us into the cellar, into the basement, and there were other families there also. I lived in a house where it was like 4 stories, and we had lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, and we were taken down to the cellar, to the basement, where there were potatoes and other things that were stored there. I guess people anticipated. Pietrkov had a distinction of being the first ghetto that was organized when the Nazis came into Poland. After that, many ghettos were started, but that was the first.
Okay, and so tell us now about the time period that you're moved from your house.
I
Okay,
didn't move.
you lived in the house as far as I
I
remember,
didn't
actually.
move from the house because our house was in the Jewish quarter, and there were
Right.
many Jews living in that area. It was like the Jewish section. Any Jew, when the Germans came in, they made a barbed wire fence around it, and that became known as the ghetto. Any people living outside of that fenced area had to move into the ghetto. If there had been any non-Jews living in that Jewish area, as there is a woman living in my house now, not Jewish woman, so I heard it from her, they had to move out, and there were plenty of places to get to. Jews had to move into the ghetto, and if you were lucky enough to have a brother or a sister or a cousin, you could move in with them. If you didn't, maybe you would find a synagogue or a mikveh or some sort of school. And if you were not lucky enough to find a place to lodge inside, you'd be stuck on the outside. And the ghetto got very, very crowded. There wasn't enough food. People were starving to death. There wasn't enough medicine. Typhus was rampant and people were dying. of typhus and other sicknesses, and there wasn't enough heat. And it was a very cold country. So as many blankets as you put on and clothes, people were dying of the cold. Things got very, very bad. My mother must have come from a wealthy family. And how do I know that? I don't remember my mother. I don't remember what she looks like. I don't remember. But I found a prenuptial agreement that she made in 1930,
Amazing.
which is amazing, amazing. And she described the kind of furniture she had, the kind of jewelry she had, and she even had 2 sewing machines that she put my father into a tailoring business. But uh, my mother must have been able to trade some of her jewelry or coats or shoes or whatever she did to obtain food for us. So I don't remember starving in the ghetto. So it was unusual for me, but other people did.
Right. What's incredible for our viewers is that you're describing a ghetto, which I think that most people, when they think about the ghetto, they know about the famous Warsaw Ghetto. Okay, and they know about the pictures that were taken there and the descriptions that have been written about the Warsaw Ghetto. But you're describing a ghetto, which is Piotrków, which was not a ghetto that had a wall around it, like we're familiar with Warsaw. Okay, but much less from that perspective. And the description that you're giving of typhus and disease and of starvation and epidemics, I think is very important that everybody knows that this is taking place not just in the famous places that we hear about, but in the less so. In Piotrków, for those of us that deal with the Holocaust, of course, is a very famous place. But for other people, they may never have heard about this idea of Piotrków, apart from maybe a few of the books that have come out. And of course, probably the most famous one is Out of the Depths by Rabbi Lau, who, of course,
and his brother Naphtali Lavie.
From my Bilam's Prophecy, which is an outstanding book too.
Right, right.
Both of those, which describe as well what takes place there. Now, describe for us what happens within the ghetto. I mean, we understand that people are going out to work, but people will be taken to forced labor as well. Was your father taken away?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. My father and my uncle, his brother, my father had 6 siblings and so did my mother.
What was your father's name?
My mother's name was Sarah Messer Lichtenstein, and my father's name was Isaac Lichtenstein. But when I tried to look for him for many, many years, until even in 1989, I couldn't find Isaac Lichtenstein because Isaac is spelled I-S-I-Z. It's many different names. And then I went to a lecture where somebody talked about different names, and the name Isaac came out being Ignas, which is really like a Polish name. And when I looked it up, sure enough, his name was Ignas. I found a tremendous number of documents and papers. I found that he had to pay 6 zlotys to live in the ghetto. So there must have been a tax. And I have those papers. Now, it does not mention my mother, and it does not mention the 3 children. So maybe children were exempt. Where my mother was at this point, I don't know. But at one point, the Nazis came in and they took the able-bodied men, like my father and like my uncle and many others, to slave labor camps. My father was taken to a glass factory by the name of Hortensia, and that's still making glass nowadays. They used to make glass during the Polish time before the Germans took over and sell it in Lodz, which was a big city not far away. And they made all kinds of beautiful glass, and it even has an emblem. It was like glass that you find now in Czechoslovakia or in Venice. My father was taken there, and they had to work very hard. I remained in the house with my mother and my brothers. So all
your father went and he was taken and he stayed there. He didn't come back.
I think people felt that they were very lucky. This is what I read, to be taken, because there were all these rumors going on that there were camps and Germans were beating people and killing people and shooting people and even gassing people. And nobody wanted to believe such stories. I mean, after all, Germans were cultured, educated, civilized people. Who would kill and who would gas just innocent people. But they knew that if you'd work and if you would be needed, maybe you wouldn't be taken those places. So
Now, do you
people
remember
were
the
very
day that your
happy.
father was taken?
Yes, my father was taken away, but we remained with my mother. I remained with my mother and my two brothers and lots of aunts and uncles.
Right.
And I read a book that a cousin of mine had written, an article that there was 10 people hiding in Platz Chernetskigo. And he mentioned them as two Rimovs, two Simbeknofs, that was their name, and four Lichtensteins. Now, four Lichtensteins should have been my mother, my two brothers, and me. I don't remember this as the four, but that would have made sense. But I
And
don't even
you
know
have
who.
found that hiding place, Rena?
Did I find it? No, I just went into the apartment and I have a picture of the apartment and I have a picture of the woman living there. When we went in 1989, my husband and I went with Yad Vashem. There was a whole group and we left the group to go to Pietrikov, and we were told that the people would not let us in. But Poland in 89 was a very poor country. It was under communism. And we were told that if we bring things to bribe them, things like chocolate, coffee, and leather belts, they would let us in and I could get a lot of help. So I hired a woman, Maria from Warsaw. And when we got to Pietrikov, she hired one of her friends whose name was also Maria because she spoke Polish. I don't speak Polish, by the way. I think maybe the language that I spoke was Yiddish because I speak Yiddish well. But of course, that was also the language in the camps.
Right.
So I don't speak any Polish, and she helped me find it. And the Polish woman living in the house did let us in, and she knew my father. She had worked with him, and it was a very nice apartment, which sort of says, my mother apparently had money and bought this apartment. And she said that war was very hard for everybody. So yes, I got a lot of information.
Okay, now let's carry on with what took place after your father had gone to the glass factory. Okay, your mother is now looking after you and your two brothers. What takes place next?
One point in the middle of the night, there was banging down at the door, and there were German and Ukrainian guards. Soldiers came in with guns, with bayonets, with clubs, and they made an announcement. You've got 10 minutes to take whatever you need, and you have to run down the stairs to go to a big square. And I have pictures. I'm sorry you're not showing these pictures of those terrible stairs. And
so we're gonna get the pictures up in a second.
Okay. But I always ask groups that if I speak to, and I ask myself, what would you take if you were leaving your home for the last time in your life, not knowing that you would ever come back? Would you take money? Would you take valuables? Would you take documents? Would you take food? Would you take your baby? Would you take your old grandmother? Not an easy choice to take everything that's important to you. And we had to run down those stairs. And people who ran down, if somebody fell, other people fell on top of them. There was pandemonium, there was chaos, there was weeping, there was wailing, until we got to a big square. The square is called Platz Tribunalski. And it was a big square that in happier days, on Thursday and Friday, there used to be market days. And there were wagons that came, and you'd be able to buy fish and vegetables and meat and all the things you needed to prepare for the weekend, for Shabbat. And nowadays, it's just a square where people meet. But during the war in 1942, 2,000 people had been pushed and shot and dragged until we brought into the square. And when we got into this square, God bless you, the Germans and the Ukrainians pushed us like animals, like a herd of animals. We were just being herded into the synagogue. And I have a picture of the synagogue now also. The building was not demolished, but there are no Jews left in Pietrikov, so it's now being used as a library.
So I'll show now. I'll share my screen just to show them the pictures here. Just one second.
Okay, so there you see my house, and the balcony there is where we lived. And on the door, you can still see the mezuzah, what every Jewish home had, and you can see an arrow pointing to it. The Polish woman living in the house was very surprised that the mezuzah was still on in 1989. If you think that the Jews were forced to leave there in 1942, the mezuzah
Incredible.
was still on.
Here's the area of the mezuzah.
There's the mezuzah, and you can see it well. And you can see the woman, and you can see the parquet floor and the stairs, those terrible stairs that we had to run down. And when I look at that cabinet, which is a cabinet that I have in my home now also, where I have all kinds of silver displayed, and many of you may have similar kinds of things, I often wonder, did any of those things belong to my mother? I really didn't want to get anything back, but it would have been nice to know that she used them, and she did. When she was taken away, we were brought into this square. On the corner of that square in that white building is where my grandparents lived. Apparently they had an apartment over there. So I just want everybody to know that before the war, life was good. People had apartments, and people had furniture, and people had stoves, and they made parties, and they even had weddings. And poor people had weddings on Friday afternoons so they could celebrate the wedding and also the coming of the Shabbat at the same time. And that we saw that very often. And on the bottom, you can still see the synagogue. And if the picture could be made bigger, well, that's the inside of the synagogue, but the bigger, you can see that there was a Jewish star on the outside. I'm looking, that's me on the bottom with the red jacket, and I'm looking at the Jewish star in there. But if you look at the top picture on the top left, there are, no, before that, please. Before
go
that,
back one.
Go back one, because there's a very important thing.
No, you're going forward.
You're going forward. That's it. You can see that it's a library instead of the synagogue. In back of the library, there's a door. That door was very, very important. Those are two Marias taking me around, and the librarian let us go in. But in back of that door, there was a man. I don't know who he was, but he may have been my uncle or someone I called uncle. My name was Fredja, or Fredel in Yiddish, and he told me to run. Now, the next picture will show you that they were shooting. Please show that if you ask the librarian to open the curtain, you can see the books around it. It's a library, not a synagogue. But there is the Aron Kodesh, which is the ark where the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, is being held. And if you look the next picture, you will see very vividly holes. Those holes are bullet holes. So you can imagine all the shooting that was going in the synagogue.
So I just want people to understand, because with the pictures, we might have lost people. There was a time when you were gathered together in the synagogue, the whole of Piotrków.
2,000 people could not get into the synagogue at one time. So there was a little shtibel, a little schoolhouse next door. So other people were pushed in there. And the people who couldn't get in there were taken out into the forest. They had to dig ditches, and those ditches became their graves. They were shot into those graves.
So you remember being taken to the synagogue with your mother and your 2 brothers, okay, David and Yossi.
Right.
As far as you remember.
Yeah.
And you were taken into, do you remember how long you were held in the synagogue, Rena?
No, but I am sure as a little girl of 6 or 6.5, I must have been holding on tightly to my mother. I'm sure my brothers, who were 7, 8, or 9, I don't know exactly, must have holding on to her. And I'm sure my mother must have been holding on to me. And all these bullet holes, you can imagine how many people were shot, either shot dead or hurt. And I don't know how it happened. I don't know where I got the nerve, how I got to be so brave, how I had the chutzpah. I don't know how it happened. But the man on the other side of the door told me to run. Maybe my mother pushed me. Maybe God pushed me. How it happened, I don't know. But I know that it happened. And I know that I am here today with many of the things that were impossible that happened, but I ran out of that door. And
leaving your mother and your two brothers inside, running out to a place that, even though you know the streets, where are you going to?
I didn't know, and my mother didn't know, but I don't know how it happened. All I know is that I got out of that door, and there was a man there. That was the last time I saw my mother and my two brothers and the rest of those people, probably aunts and uncles and cousins and neighbors. All of those people were put on trains and taken to Treblinka, which is one of the 6 extermination camps in Poland. And they were taken on with cattle cars. And I often think of, what did my mother think? Was she happy she pushed her little girl, I was her baby, out of the door into an unknown, dangerous neighborhood, not knowing what happened to me? Or was she worried about the 2 boys she was taken to an unknown destination? When they got to Treblinka, and you can have a picture afterwards, next to that one, you can see a picture of Treblinka. There are 17,000 stones. Svi, could you show the picture?
Can you move the picture down, Vyevma?
There were 17,000 stones to remember 800,000 people. 800,000 people, including my mother and my brothers and and Rabbi Lau and all the people in Pietrikov who were taken. And they were taken off and they were put through what they call like a chute, which was the street leading to the gas chambers, where they had to get undressed, and they heard screaming of something inside what looked like a bathhouse, but it was from the showers. There was gas coming in, and when the screaming and the crying stopped, all those people had been asphyxiated and were dead, and then they were thrown out near all those trees, and their bodies just put out there. Later on, Himmler came and tried, now leave that over there for a while. There should be a stone with just a picture of Pietrikov. But if there isn't, the bigger cities like Pietrikov and Warsaw and Krakow have stones, but they don't have 17,000 names. And people come, and there's nobody buried under those stones. The Polish people just made a memorial in Treblinka. And then Himmler said to exhume all the dead bodies, burn them so that nothing would be left, so that in case the Allies would come, they wouldn't see anything that ever happened to them.
So Rena, you just described, of course, the very famous depiction that we have of Rav Lau arriving with the community of Piotrków, being your mother and your 2 brothers. We have a depiction which describes him arriving at the same time, his past community that arrived at the same time, to Treblinka, both of them from Czechoslovakia and from Poland arrive at Slovakia, and Piotrków arrive at the same time. And he, so is told to us, says the vidui, the confession prayer with all of the people before they go to their death, an incredibly moving depiction, which is mentioned by a number of testimonies. But one of those things that survivors desperately try and hold on to is the last hug, the last words. And you have none of that of your mother.
No, I don't remember my mother ever hugging me or kissing me or singing a lullaby or doing open shut them the way I do with my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I just had 3 new great-grandchildren, and I love being with them and singing all kinds of plays and songs with them. I don't remember any of that from my mother.
Do you remember her face, her touch?
No, I cannot see her face. And I will tell you that later on my father gave me some pictures, but they were torn away, and I don't have any pictures of my mother or my brothers. I found the picture of the house. I found many of the things that she owned, but I don't have anything about her. Isn't that amazing to know what she had in her living room and kitchen, but I don't know what she looks like?
Right.
Nothing.
So Treblinka is a mass burial ground for your family and for your cousins, for your uncles, and of course for your mother and your 2 brothers too. But your father, Baruch Hashem, was still alive at this time.
My
And
father was working in the glass factory that he was taken in. And this man who told me to run picked me up and took me to my father. My father hid me for a while, and that was no longer possible. He said, we have to have a talk. And he said, from now on, your name is not Fred anymore. You're a boy of 10. Instead of being a little girl of 6.5, I now became a boy of 10. My name was changed to Froyam. He cut my hair. He got me some boys' clothes. I don't know how. I worked with the men in the glass factory. My job was delivering water to the men. I don't think the Germans cared about people being thirsty, but if people would die because it was so hot, because the ovens were going, if they couldn't work, the whole purpose the Germans had them there was to work and to produce. So I brought the water. They also need water to put the glass into to it cool off. I remember several of the things that happened in the glass factory. More than anything, I remember that there were big, vicious German Shepherd dogs. And every time a soldier wanted to show you who was in charge, they'd sick a dog on a person. And if that poor person had a bite, a dog bite, if it didn't heal because there were no antibiotics, there were no bandages, if he couldn't lift his arm, he would be shot. There were plenty of people to take over for him, so he'd be shot. The dogs were always there. One day, I remember as a child, I had pimples all over. I probably had chicken pox or roseola or measles or something that most other people have, children have. How I'm not completely pockmarked, I don't know. That's another miracle. But I remember feeling that whatever time that was a terrible time in my life, despite all the other things, but not being washed and not having any heat. All the men helped me. I want to point that out, that I always had people, even though I didn't have my mother and then I didn't have my father. I had 6 mothers that I can count on. I don't remember what they looked like, but there were different women who sort of let me get attached to them, or maybe they got attached to me. Maybe they needed me because they lost their daughter, but I certainly needed them. And I sort of feel that it was like God sent people like angels to watch over me all the time.
so you're with your father in the glass factory, but there's another thing that takes place straight afterwards, and I can't know which.
Yes. One day, I think maybe because the Allies were getting closer in 1944, the Germans decided to take many people out of the glass factories and the concentration and the extermination camps and sent them over. We were in a slave labor camp, and we were brought again marched to the Umschlagplatz, where these terrible cattle cars were waiting. They didn't have ramps. They didn't have steps. Everybody had to push everybody else onto it, or the people in the cars pulled you into it. Families wanted to stay together, and you can see the German soldiers there, and you can see people getting into these terrible cars. 80 to 100 people were stuffed into these cars. And when the doors were closed, it was pitch black and so cold inside. There was nothing to eat. There was nothing to drink. And there was one pail, which would have been the toilet, but you couldn't even get over to it. So you can imagine that people soiled themselves and the place stank. And it was like you're living in a toilet. Many people just died or lost consciousness. And the people who remained alive were like half alive. I don't know how anybody remained alive. I don't know how long the trip took from Pietrkov when we crossed the border to Poland. But I do know that we were in Poland, which isn't as far from Germany, when you had people from Greece or Italy or even Tunis or other places. Sometimes you could be on those cars for 3 days with nothing to eat.
You were at the moment still with your father as little
I
Ephraim.
was with my father, yes. I was with my father. When we crossed the border, those terrible cars, the doors were open. They threw out the bodies onto the snow. Now, I keep on telling you about snow because I remember it being cold and snowy all the time. But I've been back to Poland many times, and there was sun there, and there was spring, and there were flowers. I don't remember anything like that. I just remember dark, awful snow. And when we jumped out, when we crossed the border from Poland to Germany, we used the snow to eat it, and we used the snow to drink it, and we used the light because we had been in the dark in these terrible cattle cars to look around to see who was there. And there were people, there were women and men who came from two other slave labor camps. One was tanning of leather, and one was a woodworking, and ours was glass. And while we were getting used to this new scene in Germany, Germans on motorcycles with sidecars, two at a time, came and with bullhorns made an announcement saying, being taken to camps, men on one side, women on the other. My father realized that when you get into a camp, we were so smelly and stinking and full of lice and full of vermin. The Germans didn't want to be people like around people like that. That was one reason they wanted to send you into the showers. Another one was if you happened to have anything with you, and some people did manage to get some money or a diamond to hide it in the bottom of their shoe or somehow or other. And those people, the Germans were going to undress you. And if they would if I would have to get undressed, they would say I'm not one of the men. I'm not one of the boys. And they would kill me, and they would kill my father and anybody else who tried to help me. My father gave me some pictures, a family picture of my mother, my father, and my two brothers and me. And he promised to meet me right after the war in Pietrkov. He said the war will be over. The rumors are that the British, the Americans, and the Russians are close by. And as soon as the war is over, we will meet in our hometown in Pietrkov. And he promised me. And I believe that he would meet me in Pietrkov. He promised, and fathers are supposed to keep their promises. My father didn't keep his promise. I never saw him again. You have a picture of a train schedule, and in that train schedule is his name and his brother's name. His name was Lichtenstein, and it was done alphabetically. And on top, there's a picture of, so here you can see Lau, two Laus, Naphtali and Mayor Lau, and those were no, it's on top here. It's on top, Yisrael, on top, more on top. That's, right, yeah. Lau, L-A-U.
Yeah, I know, but my screen doesn't go up.
Okay, it doesn't matter. You just have to take my word for it. And I don't know if they knew each other. I didn't know them. I met the Naphtali Lau and Rabbi Meir Lau here in Israel.
Right.
And it was an interesting meeting. And it took place in 1981, which I will tell you about. But here you see their names. The Germans were very, very good about keeping all kinds of records. And here was a record of the people where they came from and what the date was and what they brought. So this group went from Chenstochova to Buchenwald. My father gave me pictures, and he met a school teacher, and he asked her if she would keep an eye on me. I never saw my father again, but this new teacher was my new mother. This is Ignace, is the name of my father here, and it shows when he came into Buchenwald, he had to sign his name and also to say what he brought with him. I don't think he had anything at that time, but it's proof that he was there. And on top, it's 117117. So I know his number when he got in under German occupation.
So a school teacher now has custody of you.
Well, I don't know if you call it custody. I was lucky enough to be next to her, and we walked, and we were taken to Bergen Belsen. And as we were walking high on the mountain in the snow, Somehow or other, I always remember snow, and I'm not sure I had any shoes. I'm not sure I had any clogs. Oh, I know that when I came to the United States, I had a frozen toe, and I must have gotten it on one of those marches or someplace on one of those appels, the roll calls. It was not normal to go into a snow without shoes, without socks, without proper clothing, and how anybody survived, I don't know.
Yeah.
Except that I keep on telling myself, and I'm telling you that I am here. Um, but this woman and I walked, and we were walking on the mountain. And if somebody sat down for a minute, they were shot. If somebody rested, if somebody looked around the wrong way, as you went along, there were bodies and dead people all along. And we just kept on trudging until we got to Bergen Belsen. There, we were on the mountain, and underneath in the valley, there were two men lying there with their pants down. And I don't think I understood anything that was going on there, but the women were talking about it. And what I gathered and what I understand now is that those two men were circumcised. If a Jewish woman ran away, maybe she had a better chance of pretending to be a Christian. But if a Jewish man ran away, and if they asked him to pull his pants down, if he was circumcised, they would just shoot him right off. When we got to Bergen Belsen, just the way my father had said, what he had predicted, we had to get undressed. I was holding on to my pictures, and one of the soldiers who was in charge there, either Ukrainian or German, a miserable, terrible man, I guess, saw that I was holding something in my arm, in my hand, and he didn't know if it was valuable. He pried open my hand and found there was pictures. He must have been really disgusted because he was hoping to find something of value. He tore them up and threw them away. To him, it was real garbage. To me, it would have been, do I look like anybody in my family? Do my children look like anybody? Do my grandchildren? Do my great-great-children? What color hair? What color eyes? Were they tall? Were they short? What blood type? I know nothing about anybody in my family.
A link to the past.
When we came out of the showers, this woman, who I just described as my mother, after my father was no longer there, stole a black coat that somebody else had left. And I believe she saved my life, because every 5 or 6 women would get a blanket to cover themselves, and we got some old rag or uniform to wear. Whether it fit or not, it didn't matter. And the women used to cover themselves, but she kept the coat and her body heat around me. And I think that really protected me. And I think she saved my life, just as so many of the other people that I called mother. I don't know if I called them mother, but they were like mothers to me. Yeah.
So you were in Bergen Belsen, and was that where you were liberated?
Well, before I was liberated, I want to tell you that we got soup once a day. And that soup smelled like garbage, because it was made out of garbage. And at first, people who came places from Auschwitz or from ghettos wouldn't taste that soup because it smelled so bad. But after not eating for a day, the second day, you would eat it and think that it was the best thing you ever had. And every day, hundreds of people would die. They would die of typhus, which was very prevalent, and starvation, and of beatings, and of the frost, and bodies were thrown out. And I have a picture of how the women took out, in the blankets that they got, would bring bodies out and dump them someplace on the big fields of Bergen Belsen. And when I went back in 1991 or something like that, I saw mounds like tells, and underneath were thousands of people who were buried in Bergen Belsen.
So you were there till the British soldiers came in?
I was there, right. I was there lying in the barracks, and somehow or other, either I or somebody took me out under the trees where there were a lot of dead bodies and living bodies, but it was better to be outside than in the stinking, horrible infested with rats and bugs and lice and fleas, and everybody was dying of typhus. I mean, we just knew that it was a matter of time. And you also have a very high fever when you have typhus, and you can't see and you can't hear. I don't know what happened to that quote mother of mine, but she disappeared. And other people tried to help me, but there was just no way. And all of a sudden, people who never moved quicker, they just started running. Before this, they had just barely shuffled. And then people who never spoke were shouting, and they were yelling something about, we're free. And their soldiers came in wearing different uniforms, and they were the British Army. And they said, you're free, you can do whatever you want. Well, what do I want to do? I can't move because I'm so sick. I know I have typhus and diphtheria. I didn't know it at that time, but I found my records, or Barbara, the woman who helped me write the book, in Sweden, in the hospital, with my temperature chart, and it showed that I had typhus and diphtheria. Amazing that anybody survived. So many people did not survive.
You remember any recollections of a British soldier seeing a 9 or 10-year-old kid at the time in Bergen Belsen? I mean, from their perspective, they had no idea what they were about to see, and again,
they smelled the camp before they came in.
Yeah, but they still didn't know what they were about to witness, and all of a sudden, they witnessed kids,
right.
there, okay, which for anyone must have been a complete shock to see adults. Terrible, but to see the children that were there as well, even more so. Did anyone speak to you? Do you remember anything?
I didn't speak English. I don't know if they spoke to me. I guess they did. And I saw pictures later on where they even put a child on a swing just to make them. But I didn't stay that. I stayed for a few months. The British had a very hard time. The first thing they had to do was there were 10,000 unburied, you have a picture, unburied bodies. And they had to bury those things. So they made big pits, and they even had Germans from local towns come to help bury all those pits. These were the kind of barracks that we were living in. They were just not impossible to get into. By the end of the war, nothing was working, and this is the kind of blanket that the women would take out a body that was there and just dump it someplace. Every place you went, you would, and here are these the kind of, they would just throw the bodies in. You're supposed to have a little bit of respect when you bury people, but you can't bury individuals when you've got 10,000, and they just wanted to get rid of all the smells and all the sicknesses. I was lying under one of those trees, and after the war, these people found potato peels, and they found some clothing. This woman is wearing a uniform that one of the soldiers maybe had gotten into, and they found some pots, the same pots that they used, or maybe they use this for, and another woman who's lying there who can't even get up there. And I was lying under there. And after they buried people, they tried to feed people, and many people died because they ate the wrong food. And here you have the Germans helping. They had no choice. They were forced to bury and log these dead bodies. You can't even imagine them as being people. And then they burnt down all the barracks that the Jewish people had lived in, because they were so full of all the smells and all the vermin and all the rats and all the lice. There was nothing left. So when you go to Bergen Belsen now, there are no records that the Germans kept beforehand, because they also tried to hide it. But of course, there were records that the American Jewish Committee and Hatzalah and Yivo and all those have. So I have records that they found me, and they even gave me clothes. And when I think of being one of these orphans that accepted clothes from an organization and food, and they gave me medicine and put me into a hospital. And because I was one of the lucky ones, Sweden had opened its doors to 6,000 survivors of concentration camps. And I was one of them. And they took us by stretcher to a place called Lübeck in a train, and from there by ship to Sweden, to Stockholm. And I have all the records. I didn't remember the name of the towns, but from Lübeck I went to a place called Bjard, And I met a new woman who became my new mother, but she also disappeared. And then, because I was so sick still, I was taken to a Swedish hospital. And as I said, we found the records that I had typhus and diphtheria and probably tuberculosis or something like that. Everybody had those things because you were just around this. And while I was there, a wonderful Swedish couple came and they brought me candy canes and they brought me a doll. I don't remember having a doll before. Maybe I did. I probably did, but I don't remember that. They asked if I want to go and live with them, and they wanted to adopt me. And I very much wanted to go with them, very, very much. But the people around me said something I didn't understand. They said that I was Jewish and that all the Jewish children would be taken to Palestine. And if you're wondering if I'm making a mistake saying Palestine and Israel, no, it was called Palestine because in 1945 we didn't have an Israel. Israel wasn't born until 1948. And thank God we have an Israel now, because if we had an Israel then, maybe so many people would not have died.
So I want to say, Rena, I mean, I want people to buy the book, okay, to read the rest of the story, which is called "The Daughter of Many Mothers: Horrific Childhood and Wonderful Life." Okay, it's an incredible book, which then carries on with her story, because it doesn't end there, of course. But you mentioned something which I think is very important, just at the very end there. You said it was the first time after a long while that people had told you you're Jewish. You continued your life, finally got married to a wonderful man who, Allah Shalom, has passed away in the last number of years. An incredible educator, as well as
an incredible husband.
Yeah, an incredible husband, an incredible educator who left us lots of writings as well, and have grown, brought a family to this world, which now you have a huge amount of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As far as
last week we had 3 new ones, so Kanai Nahara, we have now 35 great-grandchildren.
Would you say this is your revenge today?
Okay, it's a nice way of saying revenge, but I wish I didn't have to have that revenge. I'm just very blessed that I have a family. I have 4 children and 22 grandchildren, and so far 35 great-grandchildren, and hopefully my grandchildren will have more children, and most of them live in Israel and are keeping very much being Jewish with the Jewish faith, and we love living here, and we're all Zionistic, and we hope that life will go on and people will stop fighting with each other, because war leads to just the most miserable thing. Nobody wins in a war. Yeah. And I think we should learn them for all the genocides that we've gone through.
Now, we in Israel, maybe our last message now, we in Israel, thankfully, at least a feeling that we're coming out of COVID-19. Now, many other places around the world that are watching us today, either on Facebook or YouTube, that are still deep within lockdown even, or have started to move around, but with lots of restrictions. This is a different Yom HaShoah to many other Yom HaShoahs. It's certainly a little less restricted than last year, but still there's no major events like there once was. We are taking a lot of strength from you, the survivors who have been through so much until now, but have always given us this positivity and this hope. Have you got a last message to say to the people who are watching us from around the world?
I think, thank God to the vaccine now, we are moving around. Last year on Passover, I had the Passover Seder by myself. And when I came from Yom HaShoah, where I was standing on the balcony and there were no cars and no people and nothing moved, I felt so alone in the world. And I just didn't know if it would ever end and would I ever see my family. Luckily, I have an iPhone and videos, and we can talk this way, but things are looking up now. And we did have Passover last year where I had the Seder with my family, and we had a bris, and we even had a bar mitzvah. So we celebrated many different smachot happenings, happy
events together.
Happening. I don't know how to say. I'm getting my English and Hebrew mixed together. but we were very happy to have a 13-year-old and an 8-day-old and even a little girl who was born. So we're very happy to have this. And I'm just hoping life will go on. And I hope that everybody who can take their vaccine will do it. I know that some people are afraid to take it. I feel that we have to take that chance because it's something that can help us.
So I would want to thank you very much once again, Rena. And again, I urge everybody to read the book. It's an incredible book. You heard a glimpse of the story today. And there's so much more. And I'll tell you this just on a personal. I have heard and have spent time with Mrs. Rena Quint for a number of years now. And every single time I hear the story, I get a new little bit, a new gem that comes out that helps us to, number one, try and get some understanding of what happened, but also to try and feel the pain that so many of these survivors went through. And we felt that today with you, Rena. So I want to thank you very, very much for that.
If anybody has any questions, they can write to you and you can forward it to me and then
Absolutely.
I can answer. And I'd like to invite everybody to come to Israel. I'd love to meet each and every one of you. And Israel is now opening up their skies. And I hear that more and more people are coming in. So please, all of you, try to come.
Thank you very much. JRoots is continuing with its Global Day of Testimony. You can find all of the events on our Facebook page, JRoots Journeys, JRoots period Journeys. On YouTube, it'll be live. And any one of you, again, that wants to link into the Zoom certainly can, so that you can be in an exclusive Zoom with the survivors. There are five survivors that we've still got. We're interviewing various videos, different things that we're doing over the day to remember what took place from 1939 to 1945, and even before that, from 1933, when the Germans, of course, the Nazis took over in Germany. We wish that the days themselves, these days that we've entered into, will be days of hope, days of happiness. After Yom HaShoah, of course, we have the day of Memorial Day of Yom HaZikaron for Israeli soldiers. But then we have the day which Rena mentioned as well, of Yom HaAtzmaut, of Israel's Independence Day. We'll see you again very soon with the next event. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you, Rena, once again.
Bye, everybody.